Hello and welcome to another midweek episode of the Sun Solar Panel. As always, I'm your host, Dave King. You can find me at brightsideofthesun.com as well as this podcast. Solar Panel. It's always free, always fresh, and is presented by the Basketball Podcast Network. As you know, we do live interactive shows every Saturday, and we do midweek ones with other guests during the week as well, like this one. Today, our guest is Eric Pincus. He's a salary cap strategist, a writer for Bleacher Report, and he is also an instructor and host with the Sports Business Classroom. Their big event you may have heard of is usually during Summer League in Vegas, where they have a big major event there. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Eric, I've been following you for, I don't know how many years now, at least 10 years since I've been around following this game. And your work on the salary cap, your understanding of the salary cap, teams, payrolls, and all that has always been my go-to. I appreciate everything you've done.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate that.
With the reason I'm having you on today, the reason folks listening here, Suns fans listening here, the reason I have you on today is I want to talk about what's going on with the Phoenix Suns. They had for some reason, we went into the offseason thinking, oh, the Suns have a pretty young team. They're very stable. Everyone's coming back. It's all going to be great. But there were actually a lot of contracts to negotiate over the summer for the Suns. Chris Paul, and then you've got, I almost said Eric Bledsoe. Why would I say that? That's been a long time. But you got Chris Paul, you've got Cameron Payne, who needed to get re-signed. Then you've got your restricted free agents in Deandre Ayton and Mikal Bridges. And then they acquired Landry Shamet and for some reason decided he needed money before those guys. So that was interesting. So the Suns went into the offseason. Last year, they were in the bottom third of NBA teams in spending because it's a young team, unexpected to contend. They're going to be in the bottom third again this year. But they are going to have to jump up when these extensions kick in for their young folks. So I wanted to talk to Eric a little bit about that, go through some questions I have, and what your take is, Eric, on what the Suns are doing. First, overall, from a salary cap perspective, looking at the future, looking into what the Suns are coming up to in terms of spending on the salary cap in the next few years, did it make sense not to give Deandre Ayton a 5-year max extension?
From a certain point of view, if you get the Star Wars reference, like it, from Deandre Ayton's point of view, from I think most people's point of view in the industry, they dropped the ball here. But at the same time, from an economic point of view, from a math point of view, from a numbers point of view, like I understand their logic. It has merit. I'm not saying it's the thing that I would do if I was running the team, because you have to look, I'm a salary cap expert. I study this stuff. I live in this stuff, but I have to understand, like, you can't run your team entirely off of this. It's just not. We're human beings, myself included, and there's emotion, there's a certain level of respect. DeAndre Ayton feels slighted and disrespected, and if the Suns save a small amount of money, relatively speaking, in a lower extension to keep him, is that worth the negativity that you foster over the course of the next year? And the answer may be, maybe. He gets a max extension this offseason. They still have the power to offer that. But it sounds like they're looking at the market, of which it's very tight. There's almost no money. Like main two teams are like the Spurs and the Pistons. You might have a couple other teams that have a little bit of money, maybe, but there's just not a lot of money there. And teams can trade to get to money. And for someone like DeAndre Ayton, maybe you do. But there's just not a lot of money out there. And then the most that another team can offer is 4 years, lower raises, 5%. Not a massive difference, 8% to 5%. The Suns can do 8% in raises. But the Suns can do 5 years, another team can do 4. So there are differences in that contract. And since he's unlikely to get that money anywhere else, they have a lot of leverage to lock him in and get him long-term, maybe on an offer sheet that another team gives, they can match and just get him at a slight discount. The risk, I guess you could say, that they face is that he'll sign for 1 year. on what's called a qualifying offer, which is for him, in his case, about just under $17 million, right? So that's a good amount of money for the world and for, most of us. And, if you pay me that amount for 1 year, I'd be very, more than happy, set for life, not a problem. But we're talking about someone who's wants closer to 30. And is he someone who's willing to take that 1 year at that low amount to then leave the next year when more teams will have money and go have more of a say in where he goes and not have to worry about restricted free agency? And he'd still be limited to the 4-year deal. So it's a risk that the Suns are willing to take, that he'll want to stay in Phoenix for, say, $25 million a year over 4 or 5 years versus going somewhere else in another year's time after playing with the Suns for $16-17 million. So, it's mathematically, I get it from the Suns' point of view because they do have the leverage. And there's very little that a restricted free agent can do about it other than waiting a year on your money, which involves risk that, you get hurt, risk that you don't perform as well. Who knows? So personally, I think it was, a no-brainer. I know that there's some debate over what actually happened, and I'll let you draw that out as far as the negotiation.
So this is what we hear, right? None of us hear any firsthand information, but Sam Amick did a really good job. Sam Amick of The Athletic did a really good job because he talked to Ayton's side. He talked to Suns folks, and then he later talked to James Jones and Monty Williams directly. And so a little bit was cobbled together, and basically Ayton's side was 5-year max or bust. We don't want to discuss anything short of that. The reality is that in the past 20 years, only 3 other top overall picks did not get a 5-year max extension the moment it was, the summer it was available. Only 3 others. And those were either complete busts or injury, like Greg Oden. He had
Right.
major injury issues. And then the others were Kwame Brown and I forget the third, but basically they were centers and they were busts or injured. Ayton is neither of those. Never injured, not a bust. Carried a team literally on his defensive back, carried a team to the NBA Finals when they shouldn't have been able to get that far. But because he played so well defensively, look, all credit to CP, all credit to Devin Booker. But the Portland Trailblazers have proven that it takes more than an all-star backcourt to get to the finals. No matter how many injuries you might be facing against on other teams, it's hard if you don't have that 2-level domination. And Deandre Ayton did that. So he now becomes only the 4th top pick ever not to get a 5-year max. So the the Ayton side was 5-year max or bust because that's just what you got to do. James Jones floats out some interesting things. Now, I love how James Jones builds his teams, and I do want to ask you. I didn't put it on our list of discussions, but our list of questions. But I want to ask you your impression of James Jones so far at some point later in the show. But he builds teams to win games, but he doesn't always need to win every transaction to do it. And he said some interesting things when he was beating around the bush of why they didn't agree to a contract. One thing James Jones said was, and I want to ask you your opinion on, is they did offer a 3-year, or they did consider and wanted to talk to Ayton's camp about a 3-year or a 4-year max, but just not the 5-year. Is there value to the Suns to offer a max, the same max, same money per year, the first 3 or 4 years, but not the 5th year?
Well, so, someone isn't being truthful or complete, or maybe they have their wires crossed, because there are times where people miscommunicate and perceive one thing and both sides perceive it differently. I'm married a very long time, and that's certainly been known to happen
once or twice. Is
right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right. It's just life, right? So I'm trying to credit them for not bold-faced lying. And I'm not saying James Jones is lying, but someone is lying. My understanding, Sam Amick's awesome. Love Sam. And and he does great reporting. I can't rely on other people's reporting. As you know, as what I do as an analyst, I have to do my own research. I do read what other people say, and I take it as data points, but I can't just rely on it. I have to do my own investigation. And I have not talked to the Suns about this, but I have talked to other people on the Ayton side of the coin. And from what I understand, and again, they could be lying, they could be telling the truth, is that it never got to a discussion over Max. Like, Max was never offered, so it wasn't a matter of the years. It was a matter of the money. Like, if you don't get to Max, there's no point in talking 3, 4, or 5 if you're not even at the number that we're supposed to be at. I don't know what's true. The way that James, I read the article, and I read, James Jones was on record very clearly that they wanted, I don't know about 100% clearly, but he was very open in words. Who knows exactly what the truth is, or what the actual truth is, between the two parties, and what actually happened versus their own perception. I don't know the answer. I will say that I think there was a compromise available at the max. Personally, that's my personal opinion. James Jones disputes that in the interview, so he wouldn't agree with me. And I wasn't on the phone with any of those people in those negotiations, so I can't possibly say with any sort of certainty what's accurate and what happened, other than to say that they didn't reach an extension. Clearly, that's fact. The rest, we can argue. To me, you have a franchise center, arguably the best two-way center in the league, right? Like, who's a better defender who can also get you between 12 and 16, 18 points, whatever it is that, you're in this day and age, you're rarely going to run your offense through a scoring center other than like Embiid. And, Jokic scores a lot, but is also kind of their point guard. Gobert's another elite center. He's a defender and a screen setter. And, Jarrett Allen got a lot of money, for being a really good rebounder, shot blocker on a team that's totally rebuilding. So, there's a gamut there. He didn't get full max Jarrett Allen, but like Ayton should get more than Jarrett Allen. You know what I mean? And so the 5th year itself, like, to me, if that was the linchpin, that's tomorrow's problem. Like, it's not today's problem. It's just, I'm a big believer in my philosophy on how I view how to build a team, how to manage a set of books for a team. It's so hard to win in this league. It's almost impossible. Like, it's just like the Suns. How many times have they gone to the finals in their franchise history? Right? Is it 2?
3?
Is it 3? 3. Right. We have
you got to go back to 76, but
yeah, you got to go to the 70s, right? You have the
shot
Barkley era, right? The Westfall
era, yeah.
right. And just now. So if you're gonna get like one every 15 years, is that roughly
30.
safe to say? Right.
Yeah. That's a 50-year span. So one every 25 years. Yeah.
Boy. So, like that in your lifetime as an owner of a team, or as a general manager of a team, your career, the odds are is you get one shot at it, and that's it. And we have what happened with Golden State. We had what's happened with the Lakers and the Celtics through history. There are, the Spurs and what they did in that era. Anywhere LeBron was, they got to the finals.
Right.
So,
but
the
you
Suns,
can count on one hand how many of those teams there are. You didn't get very far.
Right. Like, I mean, we could talk about, I'm sure there are other examples. Like, I mean, the Sixers have gone a little bit more than the average, but it's like, it's been a long time for them, right? Was it like Iverson? So, I mean, I'm trying to think. It's the Rockets, I'd say, are a little bit higher than the average. But, if we're talking about once every, 25 years or 20, let's just say once every 20 years, some of those teams might be 2 times every 20 years or 1.5 times every 20 years. You know what I mean? And if the Lakers are maybe 5 times every 20 years, like, that's like still, it's nothing compared to what, if you're trying to do every year, you're trying to win. So if you're in that position where you have that opportunity, now go do your thing, make the team better.
Everything.
If you think you got Landry Shamet for nothing, basically, relatively speaking, Javon Carter's a good solid backup, fine, like, improve the team. They paid everybody almost, right? Like, they gave Cameron Payne the money, they sight unseen gave Shamet money, even though his contract's not bad, it's not all guaranteed,
It's only 2
You
years
know,
guaranteed. Yeah.
right. It's debatable. I thought that the Chris Paul contract was a good compromise in how they worked that. They did a reasonably good job of keeping the squad together, but they just didn't go all the way. And this is just not like a half-ass moment. It's just not. This is a whole ass moment. No, pardon my. I don't know if that's a language thing or not, but it's like,
Nope. Don't worry about it.
yeah, like just pay the guy and worry about it later. So, just to kind of backtrack, I had done some analysis a year and a half ago, basically after they got Chris Paul, whenever that date was, it might maybe
November of
however long it was.
2020.
Okay, so it's only a year. Like that's the thing is
It feels like forever.
well, there were 3 seasons. There was like 2. I don't know. We're still the schedule's off a little bit, but in normal terms,
We're
it was a year and a
touching
half.
3 seasons in
Yeah.
barely over a year. Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so it must have been around December of last year. So 11 months ago, I had done an analysis of like, okay, they got Chris Paul. What if this works? What does Chris Paul want? I think in June I wrote a story that Chris Paul was planning on opting out, and that was the first nationwide report that was happening, and ultimately he did. And that I had written that he was looking for, I think I'd written that he was looking for 3 years, 100 million or something like that, and. Ultimately, they settled on a reasonable compromise. You got more than that, but it's not all guaranteed, et cetera, et cetera. But when I ran that math, I was like, they're going to be in the tax. This is a team that has no history of being in the tax. They have no history of being a team that's willing to be a top spender. So I don't know if they're going to be successful, but if they are, they're probably not going to be able to keep Chris. And so they're going to need to find another point guard who can do what Rubio did, what Chris could do, etc. And that was like my thought pattern. And then they went and, killed it in the regular season, killed it in the playoffs. It took advantage of teams that were hurt, certainly the Lakers and some other teams. But that, it's there, you go through history and some
Every
of the best
championship has
right. The
some
Warriors'
luck
first
along
run
the way.
was against everybody who was hurt. The Lakers, when they won their first with Kobe and Shaq, didn't have to get through Duncan that year. You just go through the list, and there's always somebody that you get around. But they were successful. You have the opportunity to pay everybody. You leave out Ayton. Like, is he not a sure thing? I mean, there is no sure thing, but he's as solid. I mean, the way he was able to play through the finals and the playoffs, most importantly, forget the stats on the rebounds, the field goal percentage, the blocks, just the minutes per game. It's really hard to get a center to stay on the floor in this game because of foul trouble, because of the way the team spaced the floor. He was able to play minutes, and he wasn't playing him against like nobodies, right? He was playing against Anthony Davis before he got hurt. He was playing
and
against
Andre
Giannis.
Drummond depending on who they
Right.
matched up on. Then Jokic.
Right. Like
Giannis.
he was staying on the floor against elite talent and doing what he needs to do. They got bogged down in the tomorrow of it. Now you could argue like he's a designated player and there's limitations to how many designated players you can have, and it's like, who else are you trying to get? Like, you have the team now, you have the 3 stars that you need, you have good role players. Like, go and move out of Dario Saric's contract if you need to get out of money. And I'm not saying I don't like Dario, but he's hurt and he's $9 million next year. If you had to get out of Jay Crowder, I'm not recommending, I like Jay Crowder on this team, but like there are ways to save money. And like the Jalen Smith move is a way to save money. I don't think they handled it the way that I would recommend, not picking up his option, but like there are ways out of money. Taking it out of your best player's pocket doesn't make any sense. And even if you're like, well, we have leverage and we'll pay him over the summer and we'll get a slightly better deal, like fine. If you save 15%, 10%, 12%, 8%.
Was it worth all the headaches that it brought?
What are we chasing here? Like
right.
you have to look at the down and the up. Is the up bigger than the down? Okay, fine. It's not. All right, but how close? In this case, to me, the down is bigger than the up. It's just not a big. You're going to be in the tax if you're going to keep this team together. If you don't believe that you're a championship team, then why'd you pay Chris? Then I mean, it's like don't pay Chris. fine. I thought you should pay Chris, pay DeAndre, pay Bridges, keep
Mhm.
paying. You half-assed. You got close. You got right to the spot. Just give Ayton
Yeah.
the money,
Well, and
and no
then they
one's complaining.
blinked. They
Right,
did
and
the
that
early
and
ones, and then they
right.
blinked.
So it's the choices that they made. I don't, I can't say this is the right or the wrong because you just don't, you don't know, and it's hard to judge, and you find out sometimes 2-3 years later. A lot of these decisions that teams make, they won't know the result. But to me, it's just, to kind of wrap up the answer is like it's so rare to get this opportunity. And the West is not, on paper going into the season, the West is not that
W
strong. It's just
Wide
not. Like
open. Yeah.
you believe the Lakers are good with Westbrook or you believe they're bad. It depends. I'll give the Lakers the benefit of the doubt because they still have LeBron and AD, and if they're healthy, they're legit. After that, no Jamal Murray probably with the Nuggets. I don't expect him back. No Kawhi with the Clippers. That's two of the contenders are out, or
Mhm.
are probably not out, but they're not at their best. And then you've got Utah who they've yet to prove that they can win in the playoffs. And you start going down the list. Is Porzingis ready? You look at the list and it's like Suns should be a contender. And so why are you messing with things? Why are you messing with the chemistry?
Exactly. I mean, it's such a small window. Just exactly what you just said. Just keep them together, see how long it can last. They've got the ability in 2 years to get out of all of Paul, Payne, and Shaman if they want to. Why would you? Why would you even think about saving money on your 22-year-old? That's already one of the best two-way players in the league. It doesn't make sense. They just ended up shitting the bed. So let's talk about there's a new TV deal coming in 2025, something like that. It's scheduled for that would line up with the last 2 years of a 5-year max. The max is based on today's salary cap, not the future one. Should shouldn't that have factored into the Ayton discussions where they don't care? Just give him whatever he wants in years 4 and 5 because
Hmm.
the cap is going to be so much higher than it is today because the negotiations sound like the TV deals are going to go way, way up.
So it's kind of like talking out both sides of the mouth here. Like you you can't really worry about 5 years down the road because like we don't know there's going to be a new CBA before then, right? The collective bargaining agreement
Mhm.
expires in December of 2022. So basically within 13 months, the league and the players union will decide if they want to end it after next season, so not this season, the next season, or let it finish out on its own after 3 seasons. So we either have, including this one, either 3 seasons or 2 seasons. What that new deal will look like is impossible to say. We can guess. We could say it won't change a lot. Who knows? But it will
Mhm.
change, and the system will be different. Additionally, the TV deal, which is like a basketball year, there are like some major dates. You have your draft and free agency. You have the trade deadline. It's there. It's a lot to process to like even project to next year, let alone 2 years. Like it's hard to project 2 years from now. Start projecting 3, 4, 5. With the new TV deal, it can be almost impossible. So really, the decisions that are made should be made on like the next 1, 2, 3 years, not 4 or 5. Which kind of says to me like, why are we arguing over the fourth or fifth year with DeAndre Ayton? That's like ridiculous, right? You
Mhm.
could say that maybe they didn't want to do a max where he could have made more than 25% of the cap because he could have qualified perhaps as defensive player of the year this year or an all NBA player. Maybe they didn't want to offer more like what they call a super max. It's not quite a super max, but like a super max.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the line. And if that was the line that they set, in my opinion, if Aiton was offered like a max deal that wasn't super max, in my opinion, his representatives would have taken it. But that didn't sound like what James Jones was saying was available to them. So
Mhm.
we can debate all that, and maybe from the Suns' point of view, it's that extra bump over the 25% to 30% that was the issue for them. I don't know. But that said, like the next 2-3 years are really where you need to focus because that's where you're going to be paying the tax, right? This year you're not going to pay the tax. You pay Aiden next year, you're paying the tax the year after. You do get some relief because there are some players who come off, like Crowder and Sharch. So really, it's like 1 year of tax
Right.
that this decision was made off of. And if you look, I can't see the Suns projecting that far down the line in this decision when it comes to a new TV deal because it is too abstract. Some have worried that ratings are down for ABC, TNT, all that. And then others are really optimistic that gambling sites and the Amazons of the world and who knows the way that streaming is working, uh, there may be opportunity that could dwarf the system now and could push max money into crazy territory. If you're running a financial analysis of the Suns books over the next 3 years, 4 years, none of that matters. You know what I mean? It's not going to
Yeah.
impact, how you're going to
It's
do.
only
So I
next
think
year that really they should have been focusing on.
right. And like if it works and you keep Chris and you keep Cameron and this team is elite for a couple of years and you want to keep investing 2023, 2024 and beyond, like it's because you've had major success, right?
And they've already
So
had major success. It's like they're acting as if they didn't make the finals this past year and have the same team coming back with just as much chance, right? Like it's like the Suns are drinking everyone else's Kool-Aid and saying, well, we got lucky to make the finals. We're really a first round out team. If you're a first round out team, you don't invest big.
they
But
invested
they
in
were,
everybody except one guy.
except one guy.
So
The one guy
yeah,
they should have invested in.
so what you're saying is half true. It's like, yeah, I mean, clearly they believe in what they did and like they gave Chris a substantial deal and they negotiated a good compromise on it. I mean, I'm looking at it and it's like, Bridges is a good extension. It's a little above the average for someone at his position and for someone who isn't as elite a scorer. They're basically paid a premium for winning and for his growth. If you look at what the other wings of his ilk got, like Gary
Mm-hmm.
Trent Jr. and Norman Powell and Evan Fournier, and they're all different players. And Bridges is probably the best defender of that group, but he's not the best scorer of that group. So, it depends on what you value. Usually players get paid off of scoring, not being a better
Yeah.
defender. So, but they worked a reasonable contract. They paid a slight, almost a percentage, like a winner's tax.
Mm-hmm.
In his contract, it's a little higher than it would have been if they had just been a one and done. One made the
One.
playoffs, got knocked out
Yeah.
by the Lakers. He gets 6 million less or 8 million less on the whole deal, in my opinion. But he got a good deal and for him, and he got a reasonably good deal for the Suns. And Payne got a very nice deal for a guy who was barely in the league a second ago. Chris, like I said, good compromise. The Shamet extension, I'm not someone who's necessarily going to give an extension to someone who I haven't seen sight unseen, but
No, we haven't even seen
but
him
they
play.
did give him a very,
Mm-hmm.
it's not basically if you're looking at what the market is, they gave him a little bit, roughly around mid-level money, but on a very short deal. Except it's long if they want it to be. It's like you have the best of both worlds. You have him for 4 years
Mm-hmm.
additionally, or you have him for 2 years additionally. I mean, that's a good contract for the team. It's a very favorable contract. So, I don't dislike what the Suns did. They just need to take one additional step, lock in Ayton, worry about the tax later, and then this additional move with Jalen Smith is not great either. But it is it is what it is.
Let's talk about Jalen Smith a little bit. So this week, the Suns decided to decline the third year of Jalen Smith's rookie contract. As a first round pick, you're given 2 guaranteed years based on your draft slot. And for the 10th overall pick, it's a little over $4 million a year for the first 2 years with a small increase in year 2. And then it's only a little bit more in year 3, and then year 4 gets bigger. So a lot of busts from the first round will get non-guaranteed for their 4th year because the 3rd year is still generally reasonable. But Jalen Smith, the Suns are the only team to not guarantee the 3rd year of a first round pick since like 2005. And they've done it 3 times now. Now, the first 2 times are more than justified. Kendall Marshall not an NBA player, didn't turn out to be. Earl Clark didn't turn out to be an NBA player, no matter how talented he
Well,
was.
I know those guys. They play for the Lakers. I mean, before
Yeah.
Kendall Marshall got hurt, before Kendall Marshall got hurt, he was a very solid point guard for the Lakers. He was. I think that I think they drafted too high on Kendall Marshall. Like he was probably like someone who should have been a 34th pick, and like a
Yeah.
high second round pick, and who would have been a very solid um emergency starter, kind of like in a Rondo type role, like a non-scorer who's a legit, like he legit sees the floor, or at least he legit saw the floor better than a lot of other players. Like he understood the game better than a lot of players. I don't think he had necessarily the physical gifts to really be a high level point guard. Earl Clark was like Mike D'Antoni's favorite in
Yeah.
LA. And I just, I think that again, like I wouldn't have declined Earl Clark's option. I'm not a big fan of the word bust. I know Kwame Brown will probably come after you now. Like Kwame was really good at what he did. He just was drafted too high for what he brought.
Okay.
But he was one of the best post defenders of that era. I mean, he was like huge centers had a lot of trouble getting around Kwame Brown. He wasn't a great scorer. Fine. But the game is more than just scoring. So, but that said, like the way that the Timberwolves handled their situation with Jarrett Culver, who was a fourth year option, not a third. We're talking about the thirds, but same idea. They realized they didn't, have the success that they expected with this player, and they traded him. And it wasn't like some massive trade, but they got Patrick Beverley. And Patrick Beverley is somebody who brings specifically what the Wolves were just miserable at, is defense, right? They needed veteran leadership and they needed defense. Now we could debate whether or not Patrick Beverley is like a positive defender in how he plays, kind of like an Avery Bradley, where like they do some things that are really, really good defensively,
They show up, right, and
but it's a
highlights.
question as to like how do they actually impact the defense on the team. Like there's some analytics that you can argue it's not as impactful as it looks, but on the eye test it. But if that he's not necessarily on the Wolves to change like the math of their defense as much as to change their mindset of their defense and to guide them and lead. So they got for them a valuable short-term role player for a player that they were going to decline an option on. They sent him to the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies declined the option. They could have taken a flyer and seen, but this is where they're at. They got compensated to get out of that player, or to pick up that player. The Wolves got out of the player. And so if you weren't believing in Jalen Smith, like where were you at the draft? Where were you in free agency and all the summer? You have to trade a player like that, because otherwise you're wasting an asset. Like Jalen Smith was the 10th pick in 2020. So we're talking about like legit. I don't know. Is it a year? Is it a year now? It's like, I guess that draft was
Barely.
in
Yeah, it was
right that
November. It was barely a
right.
year,
So
less than a year.
right. So if he was like, I don't know where he was on every team's draft board, but he certainly wasn't like 35. Like he was probably
It
1
was
through
late
30.
first.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
probably in like the 10 to 20 range, or 8 to 15 range. Who knows? Somewhere on every board it was, but he was a lottery pick or thereabouts for most teams. You're going to tell me that like the Thunder wouldn't have just taken him for nothing? Like, okay, fine, maybe there you get a second round pick out of it. To me, like right now his value is such that um the way it works when you decline a player's option is that you still have their rights. The most you can pay them is the amount that was declined. So the most he can be paid right now is in free agency is $4.7 million roughly. That's the
By the
amount they
Suns
declined.
or by anybody?
By any no, by the Suns. By the
Okay.
Suns. Any team can pay him whatever they want. They could sign him away. But the Suns are limited in what, there's no way around it. There's no like you can use cap room, you can use exceptions. There's a limit to what they can pay him. And so, if we go back far enough, Devin George with the Lakers in the early 2000s was a young player who was super athletic, had good height, but wasn't really important to that team. They were winning with Shaq and Kobe and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And then at some point, they made the same decision. I don't think it was I forget which option, if it was third or fourth, probably fourth. They declined his option. And then they realized as that season began that all of their role players had aged out and that they needed George's athleticism terribly. Like he was very valuable, not because he was this incredible basketball player, but they had the opportunity to add a young athletic 6'8" forward. They had no other path to that, and he was a good player. He just wasn't a great player.
Mhm.
So at the time that you could use the rules were different. They used their mid-level exception to re-sign him. You can't even do that. So they changed the rules that you can't do that. At the time, you could, and so the Lakers basically wasted their only spending tool that next summer
To
to
keep their
pay Devin
guy.
George, whereas they could have opted him in and then used that mid-level to pay someone else. So that's like just one example of like if you have Jalen Smith, he might become available. And like, there's no money this offseason. Maybe he gets like a $10 million offer if he somehow, like, knock on wood, let's say there's an injury and he ends up starting and they end up going to the playoffs and like, I don't think that's going to happen. But
Right. But
but
it
what's the
could.
right? And if you're going to have him under contract, right? Like, keep him under contract, keep him on his rookie scale contract, and trade him, and then that other team can opt him in, and they could develop him, and he's worth more in that circumstance. So, just there's a reason why it happens so rarely. The guy is like, well, so like there could be like a player who has like off court issues that are overwhelming and well known in the league, where it's like no one's going to touch this toxic guy because he's done bad things and he's a bad dude.
Well, but just 2 years
That's
ago,
not Jalen
sorry to
Smith, to
interrupt,
be
but
clear.
we
That's
have
not
an
Jalen
example.
Smith.
Yeah, I know it's not. Jalen Smith is like a choir boy. But 2 years ago, Josh Jackson. So James Jones took over the team as the GM after Ryan McDonough drafted Josh Jackson number
Right.
4 overall in 2017. He's about to enter his third year. That one had been guaranteed, but he had off-court issues. He hotboxed his kid and all that stuff. It was reportedly. Um, James Jones offloaded him to the Grizzlies for cap space. Basically, found a taker to take him for cap space, which is weird because that's what they could have done with Jalen Smith. Even if the worst case happened, somebody would have taken him and given him the cap space back. But at least you've got him guaranteed for next year on a reasonable contract if he turns out to be a good player. So I'm kind of floored as to why the Suns didn't actually do this third year guarantee, because it's only, 4.7 million. Now, if you're going to look at it from a totally accountant point of view, 4.7 million is roughly mid-pack in the NBA. Is he a mid-pack NBA pay player? No. Does he cost more because the next year's a luxury tax year? Yeah, that 4.7 million could actually cost the Suns 9 million. But the problem is you have to replace him with somebody. And if you're going to do even veteran minimum signings, that's at least 2 million. So how much money are you really saving by not
Right.
having him on the roster?
Well, a veteran minimum is going to hit the books for a team at about 1.7 next year. And so when you factor in tax, I get it. Like, it's not that I don't get it. Like,
Does luxury tax apply to veteran minimums?
yeah, they applied to the 2-year veteran minimum number. So, for instance, let's say if a player signs on a 1-year veteran minimum, right? You could sign for 2, you don't get a discount. But if you sign a player for 1, they can earn up to as much as 2.6, almost 2.7, and it will only count against the cap and the tax as 1.7, because that's what it costs for a 2-year veterans minimum. So someone who has 2 years experience, it's a way
Okay.
to encourage teams to sign older players.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for instance, like JaVale. Well, I guess JaVale got more than the minimum this year. So Dwight Howard with the
Right.
Lakers.
Yeah.
Dwight's getting 2.6. They sign him for 1 year. He hits their books for about 1.6, 1.7, and they're paying tax. So that difference of $1 million, they're paying enough tax that they might be in the 3 or 4 times tax bracket. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say it's 3 times 1 million or 4 times 1 million. So 3 or 4 million plus the salary, if it's 2.6, now you're paying like almost $5-6 million for the player. Whereas now if it's if it's just 1.7, the tax is lower, you're saving a certain amount of money. There's tax on it, but
So are you paying
it's a
tax
lower
though?
number.
So if you get them, like you said, the 1-year veteran minimum, the cap hit, the straight cap hit is 1.6, 1.7. But if you're in the 3 times tax bracket, are you paying 3 times that 1.6 or
Yeah,
1.7?
yes, but
You still
you're
are.
not paying 3 times
The 4
2.6
right,
or
yeah, right.
2.7.
Or 4.7 in Jalen Smith's case. So
Right. And
it could just be that they're looking at that could be $4-6 million difference
right.
right there.
And like there are some players you're better off like there's different philosophies of saying like if you have to pay to offload an asset, don't do it. And I'm or I guess a liability in this case, right? Like you have a player that you need to
Yeah.
offload, you view them as a liability because of the tax in this case. You don't want the player anymore. Is it better to just eat the money, or is it better to trade them and just send a second round pick? Is it better to send a first round pick? Like there are lines where like if it's a massive contract and you have an opportunity to use that money in a much better way, then maybe it's worth giving a first. I wouldn't trade Kevin Love if I'm the Cavs and a first, because what are they going to do with the money that they would gain? They don't actually gain any spending power, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Right.
But you might have a situation where you have a team that is heading into free agency, and if they can move some players, they can go sign a all-star, a Hall of Famer. And so, yeah, you trade a first to create the room for that player. So there are, in this case, it's about tax. It's not necessarily the flexibility of they don't gain anything in the terms of like, oh, they can replace him with something specific, but they do save money. And, those are legit concerns, but there are ways to do it that I think Jalen Smith has. It's a shame like that you wasted a pick. Like either do a better job drafting if
Mhm.
he's not the guy. Where less basically a year ago you drafted this guy number 10. Why was your player evaluation so off that you want to dump this guy
You
after a
can't even
year?
wait a year before
Or are
walking
you
away.
that focused on the bottom line that you're like, yeah, he's good, but we really need the money. This budget wise, we just can't afford him. Even though we like him, even though our scouts were right and we can develop him, it's ownership doesn't want, whatever. Whoever makes the decision doesn't want to pay that amount of money. Fine. Find a trade. You should have already gone into this knowing your numbers.
Right.
It was like if you're keeping Chris and all these other players, and if you are planning on keeping Ayton, whether it's giving him an extension now or signing him as a free agent later or matching an offer sheet that another team gives as a restricted free agent, fine. These numbers. Go ahead and trade him. And I find it hard to believe that if Jalen Smith, if he was put on the market around free agency, around the draft, and they weren't asking a lot, they just wanted him off their books, but we're looking for something.
Mm.
I struggle to believe that they couldn't have found something. At the same time, I'm not on the phones. I'm not the Suns. I can't speak to, I don't have all the information. So I'm operating off of a certain amount of assumptions. So, the Suns could be listening and saying, yeah, we tried. We called every team. No one wanted him. The kid doesn't work hard. I don't know. I'm not, don't want to put any of this on Jalen Smith,
Yeah,
but
right.
from the Suns' point of view, maybe the kid doesn't work hard. We don't believe in him. Our scouts, we made the wrong choice. We've done pretty well as far as our other picks, but this particular pick, we blew it, and we're willing to accept that, and we're just going to eat it rather than pay to get rid of him. And there's no market for him. Maybe that's the truth.
But to
Personally, I don't
decide
think it
now
is.
that there's not going to be a market next year for 4.7 million for a 22-year-old, I don't know. It's just short sight. I think, in my opinion, again, it's all just speculation. I don't have inside knowledge either, but from watching Robert Sarver for the past 17 years, my opinion is that it was the mathematical rubric is we can get so much more for 4.7 million than Jalen Smith. Let's just not have him on the, as
Right.
something to worry about next year.
I mean, that seems the more likely thing. I know Sarver's reputation is that he's spendthrift. He doesn't want to pay. He doesn't have the interest in paying exorbitant fees. Doesn't have the stomach for the luxury. This is the reputation he has around the league. But reputations don't always match reality. And I don't know Sarver. I've seen him at Staples Center up close a couple of times, walked by him or whatever, but I've never had like a lengthy heart to heart. I know Jalen Jones minimally know I know Jalen Jones from his time as a player. And since, I've operated out of Los Angeles, out of Staples Center, Lakers and Clippers, I know the teams and the players who played in the West a little bit better than I know the players who played in the East as far as interpersonal relationships. I just didn't see them as often. So I don't know Jalen particularly well. He has a good reputation for what he's done. Like the Cameron Payne pick was kind of scoffed at when it was made, drafting a senior. I think he was a senior, 20, he was like 24, 23 or something like that. He was older player that high.
Cameron Johnson.
Oh, sorry. My bad. Cameron Johnson.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. They drafted Cameron
that
Johnson.
Was scoffed at the time, but
right. And, but he was, a good pick. He was like, then there's something to be said for like identifying the player you want, not believing the mocks, going out and getting, maybe they could have traded down 2, 3, 5 spots, but there's a point where you're risking losing I don't have a problem with that. They went out and proved like, okay, this was the right pick. Some of the players they have are due to Ryan McDonough, and love or hate him. I'm not sure where you fall on that. I've worked with Ryan pretty closely and have a good relationship with him. And looking back, like Ayton and Bridges and Booker are like, the cornerstone pieces. And we could sit here. Yeah, we could talk about like, okay, not every pick was a winner, like Marquise Chris, Josh Jackson. Well, like find me a team that hits on all their picks. They just don't. It's just not like it's a lottery for a reason. Like
Hey, let me ask you a question. You mentioned you've got a good relationship with Ryan McDonough over the years. I'm not going to speculate on how personal it was or how in depth it was, but we've always wondered, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. Who picked Ayton? Was it Sarver saying it's going to be Ayton? Was it McDonough saying it's going to be Ayton? Or was it James Jones speaking into Sarver's ear? Do we know yet who picked Ayton?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that like ultimately when you're the GM, every GM will tell you like their decisions are a battle of competing interests, that there are a lot of voices because your scouts are either unified or split on someone. And so if they're unified, you've got a tremendous pressure because you pay these guys and you trust these guys and you and work with them all year. And then you have an ownership group where it might be unified or it might not be. And so you might have a majority owner, you might have minority owners screaming in your ear. You might literally have, and this is something I've heard not related to the Suns, one of the owner's sons calling up like the GM saying you have to take this guy like literally like 10 minutes before their pick or whatever, like it's just or like just chaos. You have some level of advisors to the ownership who are in their ear that are trying to get their voice heard and don't agree with this is not like what happened here.
It's not just 3 people in a room is what you're saying. It's like a ton of people.
And it's the general manager's job to kind of filter it all through and make the decision. Now, some owners will make the decision, period. And it's not, and sometimes the GM is essentially the middle management. Like I work with somebody who is with a team right now and who I have a relationship when they weren't with the team. A professional relationship, and basically that person characterizes like the job of GMing as complete middle management. Like you're doing the bidding of the ownership group. You're taking the advice of your scouts and trying to just get to decisions that ultimately you have to live with. They're on your resume, but ultimately may not have been anywhere what you personally would want to do. Like it's a politician's job, a politician may have a set of beliefs, but they have to, deal with their voter base. They
Yeah.
have to deal with
Other
their party
constituents.
base.
Yeah.
There are things that you do that sometimes you have to hold your nose and make a vote on something that you don't believe in. And that's the dirty part of politics. Is no different in this particular position. And so I don't know the answer specifically. I've never said to Ryan, like, hey, were you forced into any, I know that, he has no ill will towards the Suns. He might not like certain aspects of what went down and certain things that happened. But as far as like, he's still, if you follow his Twitter,
Yeah.
you'll see
He's still
like
a Suns fan.
he's pretty actively rooting for the Celtics and the Suns because he worked for the
Yeah.
Celtics
Right.
before.
Mhm.
But that said, like, like has a lot of, pride in what was accomplished here. And I try to, like, I'll introduce him on a panel because we work together in sports business classroom. And I'll say, like, this is, he deserves some recognition, whether you like what he did. And it's just, like there are teams like Minnesota, Sacramento have had lottery pick after lottery pick, and some of them have hit and some haven't hit, but the result's been the same, no playoffs. Right.
Right.
And so you have to give a certain amount of time for things to develop. And if you're impatient, I don't know how much of this is to blame on Sarver. I know that ultimately you have to really blame whoever's in charge. And the reality is that whoever owns the team is in charge more so than the general manager.
Nobody can fire the owner though, unless
Right.
some
Well,
crazy stuff comes out.
And I have no idea what's in these reports. Whatever this story is that's going to come out, it's going to come out. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't know if there's something so damning or such a, like in this case of Donald Sterling, there was a smoking gun of his voice on tape saying things that were unseemly,
completely
and
unavoidable. Yeah.
Right. And even that was a difficult, I don't think decision, but path for the league to get him out of ownership. And like Mark Cuban wasn't even 100% on board with getting rid of Donald Sterling simply because he doesn't like the idea that the league could, vacate you of your property, something that and I get, I mean, I get that, I Donald Sterling needed to go, but I also understand the point of view of like, there are people tweet stupid things. I don't want to get into like the concept of cancel culture, but you don't want to be canceled as an owner and have someone take your $1 billion investment away from you. You know what I'm saying? Now, if you do something that's so outrageous, right? Like, we can go to the extreme.
Sterling's was over 30 years. Like his wasn't an individual instance.
But they tried to get rid of him for 20 of those 30 years. They just had no means to.
And it finally took when his voice was on tape.
Right. I don't know that there's anything. I don't know what Sarver is, quote, guilty of, given that there's no allegations yet other than rumors of reports. And even if there are reports, that doesn't mean that he's guilty of those reports. You know what I mean? Like you just have to treat it like, and if we get into the fact that if it becomes a legal issue, which I have no idea that it would, then you have like the responsibility to present things under the system of, the legal system and actually having, so I can't even imagine, I can imagine pathways, but I can't guess what pathways. So I do know that they came out really strong with their denials on something that was never even reported, which was extreme. I can't tell them how to handle, crisis management situations. Maybe they were advised.
Well, they were using some keywords. They got enough people using keywords that make lawyers get scared, because of the libel and slander or whatever it is. The Sun's defense of the report of the report was basically
right. But I mean,
if you can't
prove
something this, you're out.
Right. Whereas if it's true, there's not libel if it's true. You know what I mean? So like, but what's true and what actually you can prove is true are different things. So
right.
I hope for the best. I hope that there's nothing that has. I'm just an optimistic person. I want things. I want a better world, and then a world where people aren't abusive. And like Sarver's reputation around the league is that he's difficult, and that's the reputation. I don't know that to be true. I just saying that I can legit, because I'm a reporter, I'm a journalist, among other things, and I talk to people, agents, other teams, other executives, players. This is what everyone not everyone, but most people I've spoken to have said that, yeah, he's difficult to work for. But does that mean that he's done something horrible? I have no idea what he's done.
Egregious and needs to lose the team. I think there's almost a 0 chance he loses the team.
Well,
There will be some eggs smeared, and
non-zero.
that's about
It
it.
might be low. It might. I'm a non-zero, non-100% guy. Like there is no zero and there's no 100%, but it might be in the 1% range. Like, I'm not going to say it's zero. Like, I don't know, but like, either things are factual, either they're going to happen or they're not going to happen. That's, but the range between that's hard to, I have no idea what's.
We'll find out.
Can't even speculate.
We'll find out soon enough. Eric, thank you so much. I know you got somewhere you got to go. I got somewhere I got to go. I appreciate you giving me 55 minutes of your time today on a Wednesday morning. Thank you so much. Tell us where we can find you and tell us what you're working on coming up.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Eric Pincus, EricPincus. You can see that on the screen. That's really the best kind of central hub. I mean, I'm I'm on different social medias and whatnot. I'm on Patreon. You can find me there, etc. But the main thing is find me on Twitter, and you can see my articles, links to what I write at Bleacher Report, which is covering the league nationally generally from a salary cap, math, rules perspective. Usually, like I'm writing on the messiest cap situations right now, so that's something I got to dig into. So, spoiler, I'm not supposed to say that. Maybe my editor will get upset. But there you have it. That's what I'm working on right now. And I work with agents and some teams and some players and whatnot. With some strategy consulting. So that's something I'm looking to move into on a full-time basis. So we'll see if that pans out.
Yeah, good luck with that. You've been a great follow. Everybody find him at Eric Pincus on Twitter and all your writing at Bleacher Report. I'm Dave King, folks. If you don't know this already, you can find me at brightsideofthesun.com. That's the Sun's blog there, and also this podcast. So thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate your time today, and we'll talk to everybody again soon.